So thank you again to the Society for having me here today. This is truly an honor. Today I'm going to talk about something that is near and dear to my heart. I have no financial disclosures, but I do have some passions and I have some biases. This is a picture of my great-grandmother and her grandmother, Nanny and Alice Thompson. Nanny Thompson was born a slave in Virginia. She was purchased, freedom was purchased, I think in her 20s. And her first place of living free was actually in Asheville, North Carolina, about 2-3 hours away from where I live now. My great-grandmother Alice was the first female in our family to actually get a high school degree, and she actually lived several years with us at the end of her life. I'm very proud of these women, and they had a profound influence on me, even though I only got to interact with one. This is the John A. Andrews Memorial Hospital. This is where my mother was born in 1952. This is also the same hospital where the Tuskegee experiments were performed. She was actually born in the middle of the experimentation, so it went on for about 15-20 years prior to her birth and went on for another 20 to 25 years after her birth. Maslow's pyramid of needs has been used by many strategic campaigns for messaging because it identifies what the need of a cohort is and you target that. Diversity, unfortunately, has been really targeted at moral values, and you should do it because it's the right thing. But that really only applies to the very top of that pyramid. And so today, I know it's Sunday, but I want to take morals out of the discussion. I want to make an argument on why diversity wins and why it impacts the lower portion of this triangle, which are the more inherent needs to all of us. So let's start with diversity in science. This article from 2013 was a great article published in Nature. And they analyzed the impact of international collaboration on research publications, looked at over 25 million research papers across 11 countries from 81 to 2002. Now, the author's address was used as a surrogate for country, and when we honed in on just the United States and the UK, which were the most developed countries in their analysis, they noticed that publications with an international author, different from the main author group, had higher citations compared to those with authorship all came from the same country. To this point, a group from Harvard analyzed 2.5 million research papers published in the United States from 85 to 2008. Now, they had a little different take on it. They actually used surname as a surrogate for ethnicity, and they had 3 major findings. They found that authors were more likely to have co-authors with the same surname ethnicity than would be occurred by chance. And this was actually a trend observed in 9 different ethnic populations across 11 scientific fields. They quote from the article, "The results hint that scientific research is much like the rest of social life. Studies of social networks find that people eat with, work with, and generally connect with others similar to themselves." Now, this ethnic homogeny was associated with publication in lower impact journals and fewer citations, as compared to groups that were more diverse actually had a higher citation rate. This publication in Nature Communications added to this knowledge that we've been talking about and looked at different aspects of diversity. So they examined 9 million papers published between 1958 to 2009 and looked at their corresponding 5-year citation counts. Now, they looked at ethnicity, age, gender, institution affiliation, and discipline, and they found a strong correlation in all of these categories of diversity affecting the 5-year citation counts of these publications, with ethnicity have the strongest R value at 0.77, followed by age and then gender. This story really I get excited about. In 2002, the Okinawa Institute of Science and Technology did not exist. They put together a panel of, I think, 12 researchers from around the world, 4 of which were Nobel laureates in science and math. And they came together and said, hey, what are some of the important things that we need to start this institution? And that group came out with a mandate that 50% of all the researchers, from the lab tech all the way up to the person leading the lab, must be from outside of Japan, because they knew diversity was important. The vice president of the university at the time says there was a commitment to diversity with this expectation that it was not just a nice thing to do, but necessary for the success of the whole thing. In 2018, the Okinawa Institute of Technology ranked 8th in research output among Japanese academic institutions based off the Nature Index, and was ranked 119th out of the almost 1,300 academic institutions in the Asian Pacific. Now, they don't have the lineage of Oxford or Harvard or Cambridge, but in 14 years, they accomplished this just because of embracing diversity early on. And you can see their citation rate and their presentations, and the green line represents when they started accepting graduate students. Let's talk about the impact in medicine. This was a little harder to ferret out because there's not as many quantitative metrics to go by, but generally what's been published and what we see is that ethnic minority groups tend to go back and practice in underserved communities and treat more minority patients. Female physicians and underrepresented minorities physicians are more likely to take care of underinsured patient populations. We know that diverse physician practices results in greater patient satisfaction, communication, and compliance to care plans. It's a long excerpt, but I would like to read it to you. Providers must have a firm understanding of how and why different belief systems, cultural biases, ethnic origin, family structure, and a host of other culturally determined factors influence the manner in which people experience illness, adhere to medical advice, and respond to treatment. Such differences are real and translate into real differences in the outcomes of care. I'd like to give you an example of this. I'm sure many of you are familiar with this study. It's kind of informally referred as a Compton blood pressure study. This was a collaboration of Dr. Victor and Wally Riddle, and they put together with probably a host of other people, but enrolled 319 black male patients in Compton, California, across 52 black-owned barbershops. They went into the barbershops, took their blood pressure. They then randomized all of them into either a pharmacy-led intervention group where they were prescribed medication, or just advice on lifestyle modifications and follow-up with a primary care physician. They found that they were able to get 64%, almost 64% to a normal blood pressure in the intervention arm, and then almost 12% to a normal blood pressure in the control group. So after 6 months, you had an average of a 27 millimeter blood pressure drop in the systolic blood pressure in the intervention group, and a 9% drop in the systolic blood pressure in the control group. The most amazing thing to me is that you had an impact in the control group just by bringing access to care into the community. And these sort of solutions come when you actually get a combination of ideas with a diverse research team, and you can affect change. And this is really an inexpensive way of making good long-term change. Let's talk about business. Harvard Business Review had this interesting study in 2018 where they surveyed 1,700 companies across 8 countries. They examined a relationship between managerial diversity and really innovation outcomes, which was revenue. Okay, their variables were gender, age, national origin, career path, industry background, and education. In all 6 of these variables, they found that they were all significantly significant with regard to correlation towards innovation revenue, both individually and collectively. Industry background, nation of origin, and then gender had the largest effect. So these companies with above average diversity had a 19% higher innovation revenues and a 9% higher EBIT margins. They quoted, "The more dimensions of diversity were represented, the stronger the relationship was." The McKinsey & Company really started with a 10-year analysis looking at a lot of different companies, and then divided these companies looking at their leadership teams or executive teams into quartiles. And what they found, at least in their initial results in 2014, were that those that had more gender diversity in their C-suite and their executive teams were 15% more likely to outperform those in the lowest quartile. And with ethnic diversity, they were 35% more likely to outperform those in the lowest quartile. So as they moved forward with this study and checked different time points to make sure this was not a blip on the screen, they found that gender diversity actually added, and they started to further outperform, and this is probably because you saw more women in the C-suite and on these executive teams, and with ethnic diversity, it stayed pretty strong and stable. So this was no mistake. This study really impacted me as I have 2 daughters that I'm extremely proud of. And so when I first read this article, the thing that popped out at me was that nearly 3/4 of all venture capital firms have never hired a woman as a role as an investor. So this study, they compared the venture capitalist associates and their quality of their decisions based on investment performance. Now, this is the ideal model. They have a very flat structure in VC firms. Everything is public. Each individual makes their own investments, and there's no real competing interests. Now, just to describe the homogeny of VC firms, I mean, it's only 8% women, 2% Hispanic, less than 1% African American. The majority of these VC firms were started by individuals from Harvard Business School. And when you look at the makeup now, you see that almost 25% are represented by Harvard MBAs, 11% from Stanford, and 9% from Wharton. So that's 45% of the industry comes from 3 business schools. So they had some interesting findings as well, and they saw that diversity led to greater financial performance and profitable investments at both the individual portfolio and on the fund level. What they saw was that increased homogeny within school affiliation actually was associated with an 11.5% decrease in success rate of acquisition and IPOs, and with homogeneous ethnic diversity was associated with a 26% decrease. And the great thing about the study is they were actually a pinpoint, well, where is the difference being made? Is it the selection of the company to invest in? No. They all chose good companies to invest in, but what they found was that in these diverse teams, they were able to add critical insight and creativity early stages in these young careers of these companies to make sure that they survived and made it through. Thomas Schilling had a great quote that no one, no matter how rigorous his analysis or heroic his imagination, can draw up a list of things that would not occur to him. So the question I had is, well, what was special about those 25% of VC firms that actually hired women? They went back and they looked at the partners and the leadership of these firms, and that they had a significantly higher proportion of female children. When a firm's partners had a higher proportion of daughters, the likelihood of a female investor will be hired goes up significantly. Simply replacing one son with a daughter would increase the probability of hiring a woman by 25%. And this paid off. So when you look at the VC firms that actually increased the number of female partners by 10%, they had an overall increase in the overall fund returns by 1.5% and an increase in more profitable exits by 9.7%. You say, well, that's low. Well, you got to realize that only 29% of VC firms have profitable exits. So that's a huge impact. I'd like to close with this. This is actually a slide that was meaningful to me, and this shows the heat map for amputations in the African American community. And you see it's clustered in the South. This was published in 2020. This is the enslaved population of 1880. And what this shows is that the problems that we deal with as vascular surgeons in our region of the country deal with socioeconomics, discrimination, education, or lack of education, and lack of access. So I ask this body is as we go forward and we try to come up with creative options to treat our patient populations, that we embrace diversity, see that it helps us and will help us care for our patients, and will improve our specialty in many ways and drive medicine. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Dr. Long, for that intriguing discussion. The next